Oi oi, it's your boy Jack Slack. It's Thursday, there's fights on Friday. We're going to talk about them. It's the Fights Gone By podcast. Coming at you ahead of UFC Fight Night, Smith versus Rakic. There's also a KSW this week. Oh, fucking hell, there's tons of stuff on this week. We got Titan FC. Well, Titan FC is interesting because did you know that there's a larger Usman? He's heavyweight. He's fighting an absolute scrub. But if he's anything like his brother, then there's reason to be interested. However, as he's a heavyweight, probably not. And then tomorrow there is also a 1FC event on, where Stamp Fairtex is back to kickboxing. In fact, it's largely a kickboxing card. Like they don't really do much MMA anymore, which is good because that's not what they were good at. But we're doing an informal one today. It's probably going to be a little bit short because there's not an awful lot to be excited about on this card. However, let's get down to it. Rakic versus Smith. We're in the Apex Center as usual, and unusually we're going 3 times 5-minute rounds. That's a 3-round main event, which is a massive throwback if you're a UFC viewer, and look into the future, the far, far future if you're a Bellator viewer. Yeah, a bit odd, but then wasn't something else scheduled to be the main event on this one? I can't remember. Honestly, the top 2 fights on this card you would expect to be main events on fight nights. It's not too bad. And then there's some other stuff. There's sadly the Lamas versus Hall fight fell through. So we got Ricardo Lamas versus Bill Algeo, who is a casino. Now he's coming in at the last minute. He's 13-4, but obviously great chance to get your name out there. It wasn't Josh Emmett, a last-minute replacement against Ricardo Lamas, and that's how he just ignited his career. Rakic coming off the first loss of his the first loss of his UFC career. His first loss as a professional was his very first fight, and he hasn't lost since then. He was carrying a ton of hype from that head kick knockout over Jimmy Manuwa. I wrote something called... I can't remember what it was called. I'll link it. It was a Patreon boy piece before the Özdemir fight, just looking at Rakic and how much or little we knew about him. And then the Volkan Özdemir fight, which I watched again last night, was actually pretty interesting, I thought. Özdemir, I gave him my most improved Slacky, or technical turnaround Slacky last year, but really hammering home that he is technically a lot better than a lot of these bums at light heavyweight. I still cannot believe he lost to Anthony Smith, but that's just light heavyweight. But Özdemir did a really good job in that Rakic fight. Some people still think Rakic won, but I thought Özdemir did a good job because he came out and started pressuring Rakic towards the fence to stop him kicking as effectively. And then any time that he did step in, Rakic was countering him nicely with left hooks. So he just started punching the lead leg. And, that's just the standard strategy at the moment. There are a lot of ways to get to that lead leg. It complicates a lot of things that the other guy wants to do. And ultimately, it does look like, just everyone comes out and kicks the lead leg relentlessly. But there are a lot of ways to go about doing it. You see some guys doing it to stop the opponent stepping in, using it on the counter, floating around the outside of the cage, like Volkanovski versus Holloway 1. You see guys moving their opponent backwards and doing it, like this one. It's just a very useful weapon because it shuts down the first step, that needing to put the lead foot out there. To continue combination punching, to keep moving forward, to lean back, to throw your weight back off for your check hook, as Rakic was doing in this fight. But then Rakic showed some really nice wrestling, I thought, in this one. He was picking up singles, he was pummeling off and getting behind them into they call it the high ankle or the cross ankle, where you've taken the single and it's not between your legs anymore, it's up by your chest. So you're going basically behind the opponent trying to kick out their standing leg. And he was doing that, and then he'd put his leg through and throw Özdemir down on his hands, get on his back. He was doing it a few times, it was really nice. And his lead leg took an absolute hammering in that fight. He had like a big hematoma, grew up around just under the knee on the calf / shin. And if it weren't so grotesque and everyone hadn't noticed it, and the cut man wasn't trying to spread it out with the end swell, no one, maybe he wouldn't have lost the decision, but everyone did notice that because he was playing it off really well. He didn't seem like his leg was completely busted up, but it was clearly taking a bit of a beating. Anthony Smith, meanwhile, coming off that fight with Glover Teixeira, obviously an important fight here at the Fights Gone By podcast because it was the most notable disappointing performance from our referee of choice, Jason Herzog. But in fairness to Herzog, he came out and apologised after it. He was like, I don't think I stopped that soon enough. I'm really sorry. That was my fault. And then Anthony Smith was like, shut up. You shouldn't have stopped it at all. You should have let me die. But good on Herzog. Herb Dean still can't admit that he makes a mistake ever. So that's why Herzog's our man. But obviously Smith's light heavyweight run was a weird one. Went up, beat Rashad Evans and Mauricio Hua, who were, just washed old men at that point. Fought Volkan Oezdemir. That's the big win there. Basically outlasted him and choked him out in the third round. Got a title fight with John Jones where he did almost nothing. Just got beaten up. Almost could have won it by disqualification on an illegal knee, which would have been hilarious. But then he fought Alexander Gustafsson after that and choked him out in round 4 again, just outlasting these light heavyweights who can't do 3 or 4 rounds. But since then, that was June 2019. Took a year off. Came back May of this year against Glover Teixeira, and for 2, almost 3 rounds, he was just he was the man. He beat Teixeira to the punch. He was sticking him with the jab. He was kicking him in the body with nice front kicks. He was showing him the jab and then punching with the right hand. He was very clearly threatening to rake Glover Teixeira's eyes at all points in the fight. His fingers were splayed and pointed at Teixeira's face, and Herzog really wasn't doing enough about it. But he seemed to tire himself out. He was already in the first round, and Daniel Cormier was pointing this out on commentary, but James Krause does not shut up in the corner. He's just going, jab, jab, okay, good, now move back to the center. He does say thank you every time that Smith does something he likes, which is hilarious, but he would not shut up. He was just calling for things all the time, and because, a lot of the time you can't hear your corner if you're in a big arena full of people, you hear bits of it, but Smith's trying to do everything he says every time he says it, and it's, you're a 205-pound man trying to throw at the rate that a featherweight would. So he very quickly tired himself out, and then Glover just caught him on the fence, right hand to the face. If you remember, he knocked a load of his teeth out, and it basically was all downhill, because while Anthony Smith is great at outlasting people, he was basically trying to outlast his way through his face being broken. And Glover Teixeira, in his own way, has been doing a lot of outlasting people lately. There was that one with Carl Roberson where Carl just downward elbowed him in the brainstem 100 times, and then basically Glover just had to get through it and then get a single leg or whatever, get on top and smash him. Did the same with Ion, whatever his name is. Did the same with Kutalaba. Basically Kutalaba made a fool of him for a round, and then tied himself out because Kutalaba has no gas tank, and it wasn't even a takedown. He just sort of pushed him when he was kicking, and Kutalaba fell over, and Teixeira was like, oh, I'm having that, and got on top and smashed him. He's very much playing the part of the old man in these fights. But he's already on the cusp of a title shot again, because this division's so shit. But yes, it was strange to watch, because it was one of those fights where you're going, yeah, if he'd just done that longer, or if the fight had been shorter, Smith would have won that. I can't remember if he got really badly hurt at the end of the third or during the fourth. But it was very much like if it had been a 3-round fight, he'd either have got the win by decision or a draw by decision. Because 2.5 rounds, he was fantastic. Or at least good enough. So I suppose the intriguing part of this one is that what Oezdemir did quite well against Rakic was to back him up a lot, to keep him from kicking. Manoa sort of backed him up and then let him come off the fence with a running combination into a kick. I think the interesting part is that what kind of fight style is Smith going to fight here? I don't recall seeing him fight very pressure heavy. He's normally just sort of like an awkward long striker who does cool stepping stone right hands and things like that. But it's more like one at a time, and I could see him going tit for tat with Rakic and ending up on the worst end of it. Also, while you don't want to get too much into the effects of a previous beating, the Glover Teixeira one was pretty bad. You don't often lose all your teeth in a fight. So it'd be interesting to see the effects of that, how his chin and body hold up, how his will holds up. Will he be in full let me die in the cage force and desperate to prove that he won't, or will he fold, where he wouldn't have previously? All those sort of questions, like when you see someone get a really horrific beating. But honestly, after the grappling that Rakic was showing in his last fight, I'd be quite interested in seeing the match up on the floor. Smith's pretty good on the mat. And ultimately, even if you don't like light heavyweights, it's only a 3-rounder. Other stuff on this card that's interesting to me. I mean, the co-main is Robbie Lawler versus Neil Magny. And this was originally Jeff Neal versus Neil Magny, which is, if you're Magny, you've got to be pretty happy about that switch up, unless, you don't get the same regard for beating Robbie Lawler. But Robbie Lawler is probably, I would say, a bigger name. Jeff Neal is still sort of under the radar. Everyone who knows him knows he's a killer, but a lot more people know Robbie Lawler, even though Robbie Lawler's lost like his last 3. I think the main concern in this one, and I'm a huge Robbie Lawler mark, I remember watching him in Strikeforce and just being like, I wish he'd stop fighting at middleweight. He's just getting mauled by these guys. Comes down to welterweight, has the career resurgence, almost Mark Hunt-esque, wins the UFC welterweight title, which was, an astounding turnaround. And ever since that Carlos Condit fight just sort of dropped off. I mean, he looked quite lackadaisical in the Condit fight. The second Rory McDonald fight, I thought he looked fantastic. He was shooting straight punches. He was bouncing in and getting McDonald with these crisp 1-2s. Just everything looked so crisp. Obviously, the Tyron Woodley one ended pretty quickly. Donald Cerrone one was a very messy one, but like the Rafael Dos Anjos and Colby Covington fights, he was just forced onto the back foot and then was on the back foot throughout the whole fight. And that's really not a Robbie Lawler fight. Like, Robbie Lawler was known for, certainly back in the day when he was in the early UFC, getting out there, swinging lead hand right hooks at the dude and trying to take his head off. And that was always what Robbie Lawler was known for. Even, fifth round Lawler, all that shit. Even as he was getting more technically savvy and smarter and more patient. But when dudes realised that they could get him on the back foot and he wouldn't throw back often enough, he really started to struggle. Like, the Covington one is a bit more complex because there was a lot of wrestling going on, but the Rafael Dos Anjos one is what I'm worried about in this fight, where Lawler gets on the defensive and he's slipping punches and stuff, but he's still getting badly out-pointed, out-landed. He's not throwing back enough. And while Dos Anjos did that a lot with kicks to the open side and to the back of the lead leg, and used a great variety of techniques in that fight, and Covington was just up and down with the takedown attempts and the high kicks, I can see Magny just spamming the jab and then throwing the odd 2 in there. Magny keeps an incredible pace and is very, very long. And I could see Lawler, who likes to set his feet and move his head and then not throw back often enough, with his hands in that weird cup and saucer position, just getting outworked over 3 rounds. Of course, coming back and beating, knocking out Neil Magny would be a great statement. But, how old is he now? He's like 39, 38. How many more career resurgences can he have in him? I think if Lawler get kicking earlier and more often, especially because Magny's lead leg is so far out there. He had so much trouble when Larkin was kicking his lead leg. It also just takes away the jab somewhat. And then, for God's sake, fire some counters. If you slip a punch, throw back immediately. Don't stand there being like, look how many punches I'm slipping. In terms of other stuff on this guy, we got Ankalaev versus Kutalaba, but I think we talked about that like 5 times at this point. Kutalaba, obviously horrible gas tank, but very fun in the first round of a fight. Ankalaev tends to be a little bit more plodding and slower starting, but has been able to go the distance in the past. Really, I feel like this rematch is unnecessary anyway, because Kutalaba was hurt, but then pretending to be more hurt than he was, and then give him the Oscar, because he managed to convince the referee to stop the fight without drawing his opponent into a trap. So, I'm always up for watching Ion Kutalaba act like a dickhead in the pre-fight, lose, and then act like a dickhead again in the post-fight. Not an awful lot else on here. I mean, Alexa Grasso's fighting Ji Yun Kim, who you'll only really remember from that body shot knockout in the last fight, but that was pretty out of character. Grasso, fun, like good boxer, but has had trouble staying off the fence, staying out of grappling exchanges. And Zach Cummings is on the card too. That's about all you need to know about that card. So like I said, a bit of a short and informal preview for this one, but it's hard to get too hyped for it. Let's do a couple of questions. Hey Jack, I was wondering how effective the Mirko Krokop 3-line of attack style would be for orthodox fighters, considering that you will be fighting mainly other orthodox fighters and won't get that open stance matchup. Much love from the Black Country. Thank you, the Black Country. I've actually got... there were 2 questions about this week, and I forgot to jot down the name of the other person who asked, but almost exactly the same question. Like, how, as an orthodox fighter, could one apply the Mirko Krokop style, or Roberto Soldic, someone referenced, style of southpaw double attack. And it's kind of tricky because that's the whole thing. It's a completely different matchup when you're southpaw versus orthodox to when you're orthodox versus orthodox. And the majority of the time, as a southpaw fighter, you would be fighting orthodox opponents. I mean, there are some exceptions. Like I was watching Zab Judah's fights in anticipation of doing something on Zab Judah. And for some reason, you'll recall that Mayweather, while he did fight the who's who of his day, he didn't fight an awful lot of southpaws. He fought Chop Chop Corley and Zab, obviously, and a couple of others. But for some reason, like, all of Zab Judah's fights are against southpaws. It's really strange. And every time the commentator's like, well, Zab looks a little bit weird because he's fighting another southpaw. Or Chris Weidman. For some reason, for about 5 years, he fought exclusively southpaws. From Damian Maia to Luke Rockhold, maybe after Luke Rockhold too. Yeah, just tons of southpaws. So it's not a hard and fast rule, it's luck of the draw. It's like flipping, it's not quite flipping a coin, but flipping a coin, you could get tails 20 times in a row. The odds don't say you would, but you did. However, if you are a southpaw, chances are that you're not going to be in a full gym full of southpaws, and the chances are the people you fight aren't going to be in gyms full of southpaws. They're going to be training with orthodox fighters mainly too. So you got that unseen thing going on as a southpaw to begin with. But I think the most important thing, obviously, is that as a southpaw, you're training to deal with orthodox fighters. Orthodox fighters are training to deal with southpaws as like an extra thing, or when they have a match against a southpaw lined up. But if you're talking about orthodox versus orthodox, or southpaw versus southpaw, because like you can watch good southpaw double attackers take on other southpaws and become half as effective as well. If you wanted to apply the same sort of southpaw double attack against an orthodox opponent, if you're orthodox, it's kind of hard to do because all the angles are different, but all the targets are different too. The entire point of the southpaw double attack is that when you throw your rear leg, you are contending with basically just their rear arm and their lead arm if they bring it across. They could stand up on one leg and check properly. That was what Fedor did against Krokop. He went real belt and braces with it. He was full Muay Thai style, pick up the leg, take both arms to the kick style of defense. But against most people in MMA, most of the time, they're going to take the kick on their rear arm, which is the thing you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to take it on either both arms or mainly lead arm, a lot of people teach, with the rear arm being like a real last line of defense. But in MMA, and it still works in kickboxing, still works in Muay Thai, but in MMA, overwhelmingly, you will find that dudes start to crunch over if you start kicking them in the body, kicking them in the arm, and then you can start throwing the kick upstairs, trying to knock them out. If they start putting their arm wide, you can shoot the left straight down the middle. And that's the southpaw double attack. But if you just take that and you're an orthodox fighter and you're like, well, I'm going to throw my right kick to the body and to the head and my right straight down the centre, doesn't quite work because of the position of the lead shoulder. And by shoulder, I mean like the shoulder and the back of the shoulder and the back. For as much as people say you're not supposed to turn your back into blows, watch good Nak Muay catch kicks. A lot of the time they'll turn their body away as they do it. But even in the most basic terms, it's like pro wrestlers taking a chair shot. You turn your back, you take it across the back. It's not that bad. If you get kicked in the gut, you're really going to feel it. Anywhere like gut, chest, all that stuff down the middle that's soft and squishy, that hurts. If you take it across the back, there's a lot of muscle there to soak it up. And if we're talking about like going upstairs, a lot of boxing is built around just getting down behind your shoulder because the guy's punch will bounce off your shoulder before it bounces off your skull. When you're kicking into the closed side, that's the opponent's lead side, so right kicks to an orthodox fighter, they can turn away from it. Even if they don't have good reactions, they don't do the right thing, even if they do the absolute, most instinctive thing, which is to turn away from the kick, that'll still work, which is kind of the bummer about trying a body kick and head kick as an orthodox fighter with your rear leg. Whereas if you're kicking on the open side, now as an orthodox fighter you could do that with your lead leg, but if you're kicking on the open side, they really have to mind their P's and Q's, because if they start making even minor defensive errors, you can kick them in the head while they're crunching over, you can catch them in the body and really hurt them. It's just a much higher stakes game when you're kicking into the open side, above the waist. Generally, when you're kicking the closed side, you want to be doing it below the waist. So low kicks really like to go into the outside of the lead leg rather than the inside because it's harder to check. You've got a better chance of jarring the knee, and you can sweep the guy's foot across himself and open him up to further attacks. Now, with all of that being said, obviously there have been a lot of right leg high kick knockouts against orthodox fighters. The way that it typically works is you go over the shoulder and you have to sneak it, which is where the question mark kick or the Brazilian kick or the Mahama Washigeri comes in. And really that tends to be set up better off front kicks to the body, or if you're really good at selling it, you can sell it off a low kick to the thigh. But it's a bit of a bigger movement. You don't have that slight change of path. And I think also because the distance is greater on a southpaw double attack. If you're kicking with your left leg, it's all the way back. You've got all that time for them to see it coming in, and then for you to change the direction of it. And that's part of what makes it really dangerous. If you're kicking orthodox against orthodox and you're throwing your right leg, you need to be able to change a low kick into a high kick over a very short space to be really effective with it. Then when you're talking about the rear hand straight sneaking through, again, the line of the shoulder really messes you up in an orthodox versus orthodox engagement. You will find the guys put their lead shoulder a little bit closer to your center line than they will when you're southpaw versus orthodox, where your lead shoulders tend to be sort of in line, jostling around. And of course, in the southpaw versus orthodox open guard matchup, the lead shoulder really doesn't matter that much because it's not obstructing your power hand. Whereas in a orthodox versus orthodox engagement, the lead shoulder is obstructing the power hand. And that can mean getting down behind your shoulder. That can mean slipping to the inside of the punch so that you just get bicep against head. And that can mean just bringing the lead forearm up to block with the wrist or elbow or forearm. The line's all off, basically. You're not going to be able to throw the right straight and the right body kick and right high kick in the same ways. It's not something that can be transposed one for one, I would say if you want to be kicking people in the head with your right leg as an orthodox fighter, which honestly most people do because it's their good leg, and that's the stance that they learn to fight out of, I'd say invest in front kicking is a really useful thing to do, especially in MMA. Dudes are not great at dealing with front kicks. They'll parry it, but then they'll hold it, and guys will just kick your foot out and over. You can watch McGregor, O'Malley, all sorts of dudes get away with just kicking, getting caught on one leg and then kicking their leg out. And then just work on turning that front kick over, pick your knee up, show them the front kick and turn it over into the question mark kick. Alternatively, as an orthodox fighter, you really should be working on your left leg. I mean, that's the advantage the southpaw has. Not only the different stance and the different sort of distances, but that even if he were an orthodox fighter, his left leg is still the strongest. He's got the kick that lines up best with the body and the head, and all the weaknesses inherently in someone's stance is his strong leg. So really, you're doubly disadvantaged as an orthodox fighter. Honestly, if you're not left-handed, just don't even try fighting. But yeah, I mean, that's about as honest as I can be. You will still get chances, like when you meet a southpaw, you'll be able to use your right high kick and your right body kick and your right straight, like Kevin Lee did against Francisco Trinaldo. But you're better off just learning a different game, because you're trying to make it work in a circumstance where it's not. Krokop did that stuff because that made a lot of sense from that position. It was something that came to him, and even if he wasn't thinking about it too much, it worked. It all sort of synergized and worked well, whereas you're trying to make it work well in a situation where it doesn't really. And of course, the alternative is always, and I'll always be an advocate of this, you can just switch stances. Just go get good fighting in open guard. Change to whatever the opponent's not doing. The only time it gets complicated is if they start changing with you, as we talked about the other week with O'Malley versus Vera. Hey Jack, relatively long-time listener and newly christened Patreon boy. First wanted to thank you for the podcast and the YouTube videos. I've gotten a lot of understanding of striking by watching and listening to your content. And as a blue belt in Jiu-Jitsu, I humbly request more Jiu-Jitsu content like your piece on Marcelo Garcia. Anyway, on to my question. I was wondering if you thought Justin Gaethje could benefit from use of the intercepting knee against Khabib. I haven't seen anyone else try it against him, even though they know what he wants to do. Is this something you think would work against Khabib in general? Thank you for what you do. From Randy. I do always harp on about the intercepting knee and how most people aren't using it and aren't very good at it and could really benefit from it. And a lot of the time it is forward pressuring fighters, especially ones that want to close the distance quick and get into the clinch, or ones that want to swarm in with overhands and things like that. We talked about Holloway versus Volkanovski being a great recent example of one making a huge difference. The first match, that is. You just don't see it a lot. There's not a lot of guys who are very good at it. And the guy that I always point to as being very, very good at it was Lyoto Machida. Most notably because he could do it to guys like Ryan Bader and Phil Davis, despite having this enormous disadvantage in wrestling pedigree. However, when you hit someone with an intercepting knee, maybe, if you're timing it well and you've got a good eye for it and you're timing their step, you're really getting them stepping and you know when you're going, you got like a 5-10% chance of them dropping on the leg, maybe. You got probably a 50-60% chance of coming down into an over-under clinch, and whatever's left of like grabbing their head and coming into a double collar tie and just mauling them or them breaking away. If you watch like Machida versus Davis or a load of Machida's ones, Davis is probably the best because obviously Davis was going to go for the takedown at all times whenever he was chase that leg. Machida would drop his knee back as hard as he could, and he would punch the underhook on the same side that he just landed the knee, and he'd end up in like the over-under clinch, that is. And Machida was pretty good from there. He had a sumo background or whatever people love to go on about, but he's a pretty good clinch wrestler. And I think you have to be confident, understanding that if you use intercepting knees, you're going to end up in clinch positions. I think with Khabib Nurmagomedov, generally, my advice would be to, at least for the first round or two, move lots and try not to get into clinch positions. I think, I've done the Khabib-Ronda comparison quite a few times, not because he's as bad as Ronda. He's obviously a better fighter than Ronda. He's doing it against much better opponents, but he does still rush to close a lot of the time. There's not an awful lot of cage cutting a lot of the time, and I think that's where you have to let him run at you and fall short a few times. You have to turn him around, not necessarily even hit him, but just say, you better slow down because you can't sprint for 25 minutes. Khabib Nurmagomedov has amazing conditioning. I'm never going to doubt that. But there's a difference between literally running at people for 25 minutes and running at them for a little bit, grabbing them, taking them down, and then sitting on them and hitting them. That's something that Khabib is much more comfortable doing and can take breathers doing. He can't run at dudes for 25 minutes. And you don't need to, have him run at you for 23 minutes for him to realise that. He'll realise that as soon as you've circled out on him a few times. Problem is, footwork in the lightweight division, not a lot of great ring generals. Eddie Alvarez was one of them, and people get so butthurt whenever I say that because they're like, ha! Jack says Eddie Alvarez would beat Khabib Nurmagomedov. Blah, 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 blah. No, I'm saying that Eddie Alvarez particularly has interesting footwork, and I think that footwork is an area that Khabib Nurmagomedov struggles in, and could be exploited by someone who was pretty good with his feet. The whole Gaethje matchup, we're going to get into this later, but Gaethje's takedown defense is sort of a mythical thing. He doesn't really use it. If you watch his fights with Alvarez and Poirier, both of those guys take him down easily and use the takedowns to make him scramble up because he either tries to throw them overhead for a butterfly sweep or something like that, gets up and is already puffing. So yeah, kind of concerned for Gaethje in that regard. I think if he were prepared to enter clinches with Khabib, he could use intercepting knees and things like that. I do love intercepting elbows against guys who like to rush in and close just because of the cuts they open. You've got a good chance of getting a knockout or at least a telling blow, but you've got a better chance of causing a cut, which will make moving and throwing one or two punches at a time much easier if the guy can't see. But we'll get into how, the old killing the king Khabib stuff at a later date. I think the intercepting knee comes with a massive caveat that when you get into an over-under with Khabib, he will push you to the fence. That was what, Michael Johnson sprawled on him perfectly, and Khabib just bear crawled up into the clinch. He just went, oh, I've been sprawled on, crawl, oh, now we're at the fence. I think you've got to be real confident going into over-under clinches, and I think you've got to be real confident getting your head in and breaking away. Maybe not for Khabib. Cheers, Randy. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. I'm working on some stuff with the Patreon boys. I'm in that position where I've got 3 things on the go, but I don't want to rush any of them. So maybe over the weekend we'll have something out. If not, Monday, Tuesday. I'll be back Monday to talk about these fights. So if you want to support the podcast, get in on the extra stuff we do for the Patreons, and just be an all-around good fellow, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Alexander Rakic's look of constant surprise bless.